How's folks doing?
Excellent.
Sounds like you're doing great. So it's my great pleasure to have a few moments to talk with folks and kick off what really is an exciting agenda for today. Really thanking EPA for funding and helping organize this, and Neighbors for Clean Air for their leadership in organizing, DEQ, Oregon Health Authority, and Multnomah County for supporting what's really an important conversation. I also want to call out many of the experts who are in this room and also who are not in this room, who aren't granted the space to stand up today, but whom the movement for environmental justice in Oregon is deeply grateful. I also want to give a special shout out. I saw Hui Yong back there, who is obviously part of my environmental justice background is with Opal Environmental Justice. Hui is the executive director of that organization, Opal Environmental Justice Oregon, that's doing organizing in this community. So, Hui's not going to be up here at the stage today, but I think it's important that we recognize his contribution and Opal's contribution. And I recognize also that I stand here as a product of the many heroes and sheroes of the movement who really paved the way for this discussion that we're having today. I express deep gratitude to all the experts that are on the agenda today. In particular, I want to call out Mr. Charles Lee. So I know many of us who have come up in environmental justice know that Toxic Waste and Race was a landmark report that really set a stage for a movement and turned what you might call anecdotal evidence into scientific analysis. And it showed, importantly, the relationship between race and toxic waste siting, and more importantly, called out the intentional result of land use policies where race was an important factor in citing these unwanted land uses. So I want to acknowledge there's also good folks in government, many of us in the room here today. So I'm here representing the Oregon Environmental Justice Task Force, and we've defined environmental justice as equal protection from environmental and health hazards, meaningful participation in decisions that affect the environment in which people live, work, learn, practice spirituality, and play. And within this definition, we've called out EJ communities to include not just minority and low-income communities, but tribal communities and other communities that are traditionally underrepresented in public process. We define those underrepresented communities to include significant populations of youth, elderly, and those with physical or mental disabilities. And I want to hold this definition today, in part because I look across this room and I know there's a lot of governmental actors in this space, that we must be unequivocal in our acknowledgement that communities of color and low-income communities continue to bear disproportionate risk of adverse health impacts as a result of governmental decision-making. As a result of governmental decision-making. Right? So all of us here that are representing government, we need to hold that truth. Hold that as a center part of the conversation we're having today, not just from a historical place of reference, but as a place for opportunity and for hope. We know there's a long history of environmental and institutional racism that impacts the communities that I referenced. We know that there's policies and practices that have failed to incorporate equity analysis, that have failed to meaningfully involve those communities most impacted and most disenfranchised in decisions that impact their very lives. The old adage of EJ is that communities that speak for themselves best protect themselves. And that means that as we consider EJ implications of our policy decisions, we don't fall into these old patterns of assuming that we know what's best for them. We know that EJ has historically existed at these intersections of competing interests, most notably in economic development and employment opportunities versus self-determination, right? That we center ourselves in communities that are most impacted. I firmly believe, and I imagine that most of us share in the belief, that we can do better, and we can create better, and not accept economies that rely on and profit from the oppression and harm of the most vulnerable of our communities. This is a legacy that we all own, and I hope that one that this conversation begins to heal. And I'll close by talking about the unique opportunity that the statute in Oregon that created the Environmental Justice Task Force affords this conversation today. The statute clearly describes the duties of natural resource agencies, including Oregon Health Authority and Department of Environmental Quality, who are obviously in the room today, and very clearly identified in the work to establish clean air rules that protect human health. The statute, which was adopted in 2007, and again, I need to give real honor to former Senator Evel Gordley, who was really instrumental in advocating for that legislation. It creates guidance for discussions that I hope this group today continues to push, and specifically calls out that each agency shall, in making a determination whether and how to act, consider the effects of the action on environmental justice issues. And how we define consider is important for today. And I emphasize as a major component of what will lead to progress in air quality protections from an EJ frame. What does it mean to consider environmental justice? And I think we have a full agenda today that really gives us some of those opportunities. Cumulative risk assessment being one of those that for decades I think people have been talking about as an important frame for environmental justice protection. And the other pieces that I'll call out are really indicative of how we do the work. It calls out that, and I know today on the agenda there is pieces around best practices, and certainly there's experts in the room that are doing best practice every day and engaging and mobilizing communities to use their voice to push for change. But it also calls out agencies that they shall hold hearings at times and locations that are convenient for people in the communities that will be affected by decisions stemming from those hearings. That they shall engage in public outreach activities in communities that will be affected by decisions of that agency. They shall create a citizen advocate position, which I think is also an important piece here. How do we actually fund the work to do the work of the agencies that they're required to by law? And that position is responsible for encouraging and ensuring public participation, ensuring that the agency considers environmental justice issues, and informing the agencies of the effects of its decisions on communities that are traditionally underrepresented in public process. So I'll kind of leave it there because I think that's the challenge of what we have to do. How do we engage those, holding on that adage, right? Communities that speak for themselves best protect themselves. Recognizing how we do this work matters, we must center those that are most impacted by the decisions. This is critical of not just the spirit of environmental justice from a movement perspective, but it's the law in Oregon. And we have, again, this opportunity for perhaps the first time in this state to truly define in the area of air toxics what's the consideration of environmental justice means for our state. And I'm excited to see the energy and discussion around cumulative impacts and meaningful involvement, as I believe that those are the center of this work. I'm excited for this conversation, as overdue as it is. I'm excited that we're in the room today and we have this opportunity. So I thank you and look forward to the conversation.